Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. On today's tutorial I'm going to teach you how to paint a realistic moon, or realistic enough to place it within various different scenes and landscapes that you may create in the future as well. Now, because we're working digital, anything that we create here can be put as a layer into another scene later on, so it's the kind of detail that you could reuse again and again. So as always with my tutorials, I've got a certain number of colours that I've created in advance. Now these colours all have a code, and if you go into the description of this video, you'll notice the hexadecimal codes have been put in the description. You just need to type them in here, press enter, the colour will appear up here, tap them into your own palette and you've created your own. There's also a link to my Patreon and you can download the Procreate colour file there for free as well. And that saves you a little bit of time, you don't have to piece them all together yourself. In terms of the canvas size, I've opened an A4 canvas, and the brushes I'm going to be using are the soft brush, the medium brush, both within airbrushing, and I'm going to use a different brush as well within the industrial brushes, and I'm going to use this heavy metal brush just to add some extra textures as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my background and I'm going to put it on a black background, solid black. All you need to do is go to the section here where you can see the blacks are. It doesn't matter really within which colour around the colour wheel, as long as within that area you can just double tap and it goes straight to the solid black. And now we have a black background. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my wrench symbol settings, the actions, go to canvas. We want to turn the drawing guide on and we want to edit the drawing guide. And we've got it on a grid, although you can't see it at the moment because on the top section here, it's set to this end, which is black. So we're going to put it somewhere across. We may as well have it on white, I suppose. We can always change it later on if we can't see it. I'm going to put the opacity at 50% and maybe the thickness at 50% as well. In terms of the grid size, well, you don't want it too small, so I'm going to put the grid size, let's keep it a nice number somewhere. I mean, you can type it in here as well. Let's put it at 360. Let's click done. And now we have a nice grid on a black background. So with my brushes, I'm going to go back to my airbrushing. I'm going to go to the medium brush, go to my colours. Now I don't want the darkest colour that I'm going to use, and I don't want the lightest colour either. So I'm going to go for somewhere in the centre of those two colours. Now I'm probably going to really go for the third colour along and see how that works for us. We also have another colour here. That is a blank. That is another colour. This colour is going to be for the clouds. Now you don't need to add that detail if you want to use this moon in another landscape, but I'm going to use it just to create the overall effect that the moon is actually glowing, and that will assist us with that later on. But to begin with, we're just using these 6 colours, and I'm going to pick the third colour along to begin with. So again, we're on a medium brush, but I'm just going to turn the size of that brush to 2%, turn it up 100% opacity. So now that I've got that grid shape, I'm just going to draw a circle. It doesn't really matter how I do it, as long as when I reach the end, I hold and wait for it to snap to a better shape. Now we can edit that shape into a circle. Now, as long as we don't tap out of it somewhere else on the canvas, it will stay editable. So we're going to just move it from the line, not from the dots. If we move it from the dots, it will distort it. And we use our finger as well. We can direct it to where we want it to be. Now, I'm going from here is the center and here is the center line. And I just want to increase it so it fits snugly within a grid that's 4 by 4. So it just clips the edge of that grid in that grid formation. And then we can tap out of that and now it's firmly there. What I'm going to do next is just drag the colour that we've just used into the centre of that circle and it fills it. Now it has got a little bit of a line where it's not quite filled, so we'll backtrack that, try that again, and then we can just slide that across as long as we haven't let go, and it will do a pretty good job of getting rid of the vast majority of that line now. Go back to our brushes. This time we're going to use the soft brush. We're going to turn that down to 2%, and we'll have the opacity at around 20%. Now you can just about see the grid still, which is just good enough. We'll go back to our colours and we're going to start going darker this time. So we'll pick the second colour along. So we've used the third one, we'll go to the second one now. So again, we're on the 2% size, we're on the 20% opacity, and we're going to start putting in some of the blotches that you would see on the actual moon surface. So these different dark blotches and shapes that appear on the surface have been identified and have different names. So clearly I've been looking at the actual photographs that are available. It's not something plucked from my imagination. So if it helps to have an actual reference available, then do use that in addition to this. But the first thing we're going to represent is a couple of what's called C's, and the first one is going to be the C of Serenity. Now, I'm just going to roughly place in a few blobs in the area to begin with. Now it is, as you can see, in this square, so it's the first full square on the right side towards the top. So there's 4 squares that are in the center there, and it's the top right one. I'm not going to worry too much about the accuracy of every single tiny detail of it, but either way we're going to create roughly a blob in that corner. So it's a slightly flattened out blob. We'll go into it and we'll adjust it and amend it slightly with more texture and other things, but as long as we get the basic shape in there to begin with, then that's great. And then in this corner of the same square, we've got most of what would be the Sea of Tranquility as well. Now that practically touches, but it will also extend just slightly out of our box on the right hand side there as well. Again, we don't need to worry too much about absolute accuracy. This is something that when it's zoomed out and it's a small detail of a bigger painting, it's going to look great anyway. Now this actually will have a section that comes down from the blob. Again, don't need to go into detail as long as we have this feature. And then just to this side of that, but slightly lower down, we'll have another blob. And this one here is called the Sea of Nectar. Seeing as we're moving along here, we have in this square, to the right of it, we have the Sea of Fertility. We'll just go for the middle section here so you can see we've got the middle of this square, and we'll just create another blob here as well. And then at the top of this same square, and just slightly to the side, it goes slightly between the next one above and this one. And this is the Sea of Crises. So that will do for most of this section. We can go back in and refine, but we're going to move over to another area. So there is another section here that is known as the Sea of Showers or the Sea of Rains, or Mare Imbrium, and it's a really big blob this time. Now it goes, we looked at this 4 squares here, we're going for the top corner of this top left square, but it extends out of there as well, so we'll just make that really nice and sizable, a really big blob. And you can see in its ellipse slightly on its side, and it's kind of, if you had to describe the direction, it's roughly like that. Again, don't worry about every minute detail with this, we're just getting the rough placement. And it should almost touch this one here, but not clearly, it starts to break up around that edge. Then we've generally got a really large area here that covers almost up to the edge, and this is the Ocean of Storms, that's the name of that region. So we're going to just generally fill in here now. So it's going to cover this area, and because it goes round a sphere, it starts to follow that shape as well. So there's a section that kind of follows around here, then it comes down, and you can see in this square, which is the 3rd row down and the one that's right on the edge, you're going to have most of this half on a diagonal covered. And then we've got an area at the top section here, which is called the Frigid Sea, and we've got 2 squares at the very top there, and we're just going to have a blob extends pretty much across the middle, but slightly at an angle, mainly in this one, but it goes slightly across as well. Now it should come down in a series of blobs and slightly meld in with that one there too, but we don't need to get too bogged down in that. Now if we come down to near the bottom, there's this bottom square, so we've got 2 of them, but it's really all contained within this one now, and we're going to have a blob here in this top corner. And then we'll go up to the top right corner, but it also extends into the square above, and we'll have another blob there, and that's the Sea of Clouds in this area. Maybe just a hint of something there between the 2. Don't need to get into too much detail with that. There's going to be a nice big open area here, which is great, but then we've got this square is where we need to add some final details, and maybe in this section too. So from this blob, it just streaks up in a diagonal, roughly speaking anyway, and then another one, and then another one almost joins up here as well. And then we're going to cut all the way across diagonally on that, and then just fill in this area really. Now we don't want to see any straight lines or any absolutely clear edges, but you can just see I'm starting to fill it in a rough fashion. Now there's still a couple of identifiable blobs here, so we'll just fill them in here. So we're in the box that's in the center, the top left one, just at the bottom here where you can see there's a gap. There's a blob there, and there's another darker section there as well, something like that. So we're getting much closer to an effect of a moon, as you can see when you zoom out. So if we zoom out, you can see we're already getting a passable moon type of texture now. We're going to not stop at that point, but you can see the overall effect from a distance is starting to be generated. Now I was going to mark some other important features, and there's a couple of really big craters that appear on the moon. So we've just used the second colour. We're going to move along to a lighter colour, which now will be the fourth colour along. We'll keep the brush settings the same, so it's 2% size, 20% opacity. First of all, we're going to mark in the Tycho crater. So if we go to this bottom square here, on our grid, it will be the centre point, almost on the edge, but not on that line. So that's going to be the centre of our crater area. We'll just have it light to begin with, just as a blob, so we know where we're going to put it. And then we're going to have the Copernicus crater. And if we take of this square, these four squares, we're going to go for the bottom left one. And it's just going to be quite high up here around this section. That's going to be the Copernicus crater. And if we just reduce the size of our brush a little bit to the lower end of 2%, there's going to be another crater. So we've got another square here. So somewhere towards the top right, we're going to have another centre of a crater as well. Now I'm going to create another layer so that we can start to add some different effects. And I'm going to stick with this slightly lighter colour, but I'm going to have it now, like I was showing you just a moment ago, the lower end of 2%. And I'm just going to increase the opacity up to 30%. So this is on our new layer. We're still using the soft brush, but we're just going to start using these craters now to start bringing in some extra textures. So this is the Tycho crater, and I'm just going around the edge of our blob. And then from this point, we're going to start creating some lines that actually start to help us describe the shape of the sphere, the moon. But these streaks, I presume, were when things have hit the surface of the moon. So a big object has crashed into the moon and it sent everything flying in every direction. So which is why we get these streaks, these lines created by projectiles, I presume. So we can extend them across in every direction. So I'm only pressing lightly at this point. It's important that you build it up gradually, I feel. So you can see I'm moving my hand round just to try and help create these shapes. Now when we get to this bottom section, it's going to still send things out, but just in shorter dashes. When we get to this section, it's going to go with the curve of the sphere. Again, I'm moving around just to try and help with that shape, like that. Now I'm just going to turn the opacity up even further to 50% now, just to get one or two of these shapes a little bit more distinct. I'm going to leave like a light section in the center, then a darker gap where I haven't added any of the lines, and then they start getting lighter again beyond that. Now this is still just a rough placement. We'll move on to another one. We have two main craters here that seem to have trails and things emanating from them. So we'll pick this one, which is the Copernicus crater. And again, we're not going to do anything immediately around the edge, but we'll start to have things coming out from it. So for some reason, this one, it doesn't seem to have the bold straight lines. They don't seem to be quite as distinct, but you do have things coming out in every direction from it. So we can almost keep these not quite as straight in terms of the lines, or the overlapping lines. And they seem to just go in every direction as we go around as well. Try not to press on too much. In fact, I'm going to turn the opacity down a little bit more. So let's just take back some of those. We'll put it back down to 30% again. We'll just extend these out. Again, the effect of this is going to be viewed from a distance, so we don't need to get too bogged down in every single detail. And then we're going to pick this one and do something similar with that as well. Just a few things that are emanating from that center point. We'll create another layer. We'll go back to our colors, and I'm going to go to the darkest color that we've got selected now, and you can see it is a note or two darker than everything else. So I'm going to change my brush this time. I'm going to go to the industrial brushes, and I've got it set to the heavy metal. I'm just going to set it to 2% size again. Let's try the 30%. In fact, let's turn it up a little bit. We'll turn it up to 60% opacity, just so we can see it. There you go. And I'm just going to go around the edges of some of these blobs and create some slightly darker suggestions of outlines. Now, I don't want to go too far with this, but there definitely should be a change of tone around these edges. For these two, certainly, it seems to be the case. And we can also move into the center, just generally break up the flatness, we want to create a bit more texture, slightly more mottled effect, but certainly around these bottom edges here we want a little bit more. Not too much for these, but again just a few blobs to break up. Now close to where the Copernicus crater is, there should be some extra dark blobs as well. So we're still within this square. We don't extend, we don't suddenly put the dark blobs in the light area. We're putting some of these dark blobs within the areas that are already a little bit darker anyway. And we're just adding some of these into this center area. We can create a selection of different blobs and just blend them in a little bit. Maybe a few down here as well. Just to create some more texture. A little bit of darkness creeps in between these two craters. And I'm going to turn the size of the brush up to 5%. I'm just going to start generally lightly adding more texture into this area too. And into those blobs generally. I'm just lightly bringing it across this area in general. So I'm extending it all the way across. I'm really pressing on lightly at this point, but I'm taking it all the way across over the surface, keeping with the movement of the sphere a little bit, but I'm not too bothered. So maybe on the outer edges of this impact crater, we can just have it darkening up as it gets away from these streaks. So it almost goes like a really light area, then the lines that's extended, projected outwards, and then maybe we get like a slightly darker arrangement a little bit around it like that too. We'll create another layer. So I've used the first, the second, the third. We'll go for the fourth colour along, and we'll just start doing something similar with this lighter colour too. Just going around, adding some more noise and texture all the way around. Again, this is a detail that's probably not going to be best looked at super close up. This is something that's going to help generate an overall effect when you look at it as a detail within another painting. So moving along to the last couple of colours now, I'm going to create one last layer. We'll go back to our brushes, go to the airbrushing, stick to the soft brush. I'll have it set at 2% size and 30% opacity. We'll go back in and we'll just start to refine some of these details. So we want around the inside of that crater a really light area. We also want to really highlight the middle of that crater and this one. There's one thing we are missing, in fact. Before I do any more, we'll go back to the darker colour, and there is a Plato crater, as it's called, and it should be up in this section. Now it's a really well-defined crater like that. Now there might be other elements of craters that are just on the surface, or sorry, just on the edge. You might want to just use some flat shapes to suggest that as you get nearer the edge, there's a series of different really clear craters just on that top edge. But you don't see anything other than just a dark dash like this. Think of it as an ellipse though, because if you don't imagine that it's supposed to represent an ellipse, you get too many dashes and it won't quite work. So every now and again you might get one that comes further forward and you can see it as more of a proper ellipse, like a circle, but it's only on that top edge is it going to start being a line. So we're just alternating between this darkest colour and some of our lighter colours now. So we're just going to start adding more noise, more blobs. So we'll go back again to this second colour in from the right. So it's not quite the whitest colour, but we can just start adding some extra blobs. Now there's quite a lot of things going on in this area, so you need quite a few light areas too. We're going to turn the size of the brush up to 3% and the opacity down to 15%. I'm just going to start building some of the lightness up in this area. So any of those little blobs that I've created, I'm just exaggerating the effect by going around them with a slightly bigger, lighter brush, softer brush. I'm going to repeat that process, so I'm just going to turn it down to 2%, put it back up to 30%, and just find some areas that seem to be really flat. Add some extra points of texture and light, and you can also add dark textures in there as well. Don't go too crazy on this. If you have a reference, you can perhaps just look at it and see where you maybe have a collection of blobs and just start to add them in. And you can add, in addition to the dark ellipses near the edge, you can start adding some light things in there as well. Again, we're just after the overall effect. When we zoomed out and it's within another piece, it's just going to be a slightly more realistic, well, frankly. So we're not after photorealism at this point. It's going to look good in a picture when it's zoomed out. So if you place this in a landscape, a moonlit sky, this is going to look so much more realistic, and you can reuse this again and again. So we're just going to condense all of these layers. I'm going to go to my guide. I'm going to switch off the grid, the drawing guide. I'm going to go to the transform setting. I'm going to reduce the size of our moon, put it in the center. I'm going to create another layer, but we're going to put it underneath. Go to our soft brush. So I'm just going to put the brush at 15% and the opacity at 10%. And I'm just going to start doing some taps and some blobs in here. Just go around where the moon is like that, just so it softens outwards from that point. Keep it really quite loose though. I'm going to turn the opacity down to 5%. I'm just going to extend that with a couple of circular motions so it extends it further out as well. Keep it quite simple like that. Now if you wanted to adjust the brightness of the moon, make it more powerful, there's different ways you can do that. You can go to your adjustments, hue, saturation, brightness, affect the whole layer, and you can just ramp up the brightness that way, just by a few degrees. That makes it more impactful. Or you can go back to your adjustments, go to your bloom, affect the whole layer and ramp that up. Now that sometimes is a bit overpowering and you can't control exactly where it's going to go. But a better way of using the bloom perhaps is to go to the bloom setting again, use the pencil, and it's set to 50% on the slider. We'll just put it at 5% size, 15% opacity, and I'm just going to choose to brighten up some areas, not everything. So I'm just going to go around the edge of the moon there perhaps, and choose some areas to really ramp up the brightness. Like that. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful and you can find a way of using these effects to actually enhance your nighttime landscape scenes. If you've enjoyed watching this tutorial, please make sure to subscribe, check out my other playlists, and I shall catch you back here soon. See you later.